Hey guys, I'm here with my friend Brooke for our second survivor story. So, Brooke, I guess we've known each other for maybe a year
Yeah,
and reached out to Call to Peace and has been involved in our online support group, and even I think is going to be a support group leader
yep, hopefully.
out on the West Coast. Yeah. So, Brooke, could you tell us just a little bit about your story and how you ended up having to come or reach out to us in the first place?
Yeah, definitely. So I met my ex-husband when I was 15, and we got married when I was 19. And there were definite signs, but I didn't know what I was seeing. I grew up in a family that he wasn't abnormal. And so we've been married about 4 years when I had my first son. And that's when I really thought, there's a problem here. And I would take our issues to the pastor, and I would say, he's physically intimidating. And I would give specifics, and I would say, well, and he talks to me in this way. And the pastor would just say, well, he's not beating you up every night, so you can't leave him. And so we had a second son 14 months later. I went back to the pastor. This is really a nightmare. And he came and gave us counseling. And it was things like, you should take a walk and talk nice to your wife, and, cook him dinner and dress nice. And that was the advice I got. Not helpful. And then we had another child 4 years later, and then another child 4 years later. And so we have four kiddos. And when I had a baby, my last one, who's 8 now, we had an incident where I homeschool. So on a Friday night, it's a really big deal to me to set up dinner and then a movie. And we're so excited because it's the end of the work week for us. And so I do all that, and I rented a movie. And I said something at dinner, and I can't remember what it was. And my ex-husband says to me, you can't watch the movie tonight with us. And I'm like, really? What are you talking about? And I'm thinking, you can't make me not watch the movie. And sure enough, he locked me in my bedroom and was telling me that I was making him want to beat me up, and some other physically intimidating things. And then proceeded to keep me up there. If I walked near the door, he would run up the stairs, and I didn't get to watch that movie with my kiddos. And it was a really devastating moment in my life. And I realized I wasn't sure if I could keep going in this marriage. So I called my pastor and I told him, and it took about 3 times of me relating the story before my pastor understood what I was saying and came and talked to my husband at the time and asked him to leave. He ended up leaving for one night. And when they came back, I was like, I'm not safer now. I'm more in danger. And the pastor just said, well, I can't keep a man from his home. And so incidents like that with my churches was really common. And so we went on again, and we would change churches frequently because he would get himself into enough trouble that he wouldn't want to be under that pastor anymore. And so we changed to a new church. And so we changed to another church. And at this point in time, so this was about 4 or 5 years ago, probably about 4 years ago, I started getting really sick. My body was done dealing with the stress. And so I started getting daily debilitating migraines, which meant I was in bed most afternoons, throwing up and in excruciating pain. I also came up with kidney failure. My thyroid died. My body was literally shutting down. And we changed to another church. And in that process, I went to the church again, and we had another incident. I went to the church and said, I don't feel safe. I feel like this is not a good marriage for me. And again, the pastors were like, well, he's not beating you up. You can't leave him. And even if he was beating you up, you couldn't divorce him.
But
And
he's just
so,
killing your body. I mean, seriously, so many of the
yeah,
women that we work with have those exact same physical symptoms. And they're going, well, it's not physical abuse. And we're going, but it's affecting you and your children physically. I mean,
yeah,
we've seen even symptoms in children with stomach issues and so forth. And as soon as they got in a safe place, all those symptoms went away a lot of times.
right. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yep.
Sorry, I just wanted to comment on that because I was like making myself a note so I'd remember, but I'll go ahead and do it now.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. So we were at that church. We were under counseling for 3 years. At about year 2, they brought in some what they call conciliatory counselors. They specialize in conflict in marriage. And at this point, I still don't really think what's going on in my marriage is abuse. So at this point, I've been married 18 years, 18 or 19 years. And I still don't call what's happening in my marriage abuse because no one else would. And if I brought the word up, my husband or the pastors would say, well, this isn't abuse. You're being reactive. Don't call this abuse. That's not fair to him. And so I go to these, they come and do a 1-day seminar at our church. And at the end of the seminar, I say to them, will you work with me and my husband? We have a very difficult marriage. And they say, sure, yeah, no problem. And my husband was at that conference with me that day. And he says, no, we don't need any more help. No one can help us. We need to help ourselves. And he continues to say that for about 3 months. And at that point, I am ready. I've already asked my pastors if I could have a divorce or leave him or separate, and they're saying no. And so I contacted this couple and said, hey, can you help me? And they said, sure, yeah, we'll meet with you. And so I meet with them, and I'm in the meeting for about 10 minutes. And it's a couple, and they've been pastors for a long time. And the pastor, the guy says to me, Brooke, I think you're being abused. And the reason why I think you're being abused is because you won't make eye contact with me. You are curled up in a ball. The way you talk about what's happening to you is you take a lot of ownership for it when you can't control what the other person's doing to you. And you're very defensive of him. And so we think that this is a problem. And so they start working with me. They're not specifically trained in abuse, but they've done peacemaking and courses and things like that. So they start working with me, and we're all hopeful maybe he'll change. There's an incident in December, then I'm seeing them. There's an incident in December where he tells one of my sons that he wants to kill me. And I tell my church, he's very specific in his description. And I tell my church, and my church says, I said, can I file a protection order? And my church says, no, you can't file a protection order. That would end your marriage, and that absolutely can't happen. So you can't file a protection order.
Oh, wow.
So I keep living with him for about 8 weeks, and it just is getting worse and worse and worse. And I finally tell my church, I cannot live with him. He needs to move out. At this point, I'm still hopeful that he'll change. I'm hearing that he's abusing me, but I'm still not fully convinced because my pastors are saying he's not. And
Well,
that
and go back. I like what this reconciliation person said.
Yeah.
You had learned to take responsibility for it. So when an abused woman or person goes for counseling, I know that I took far more than my fair share of the blame. I would find one little speck of something that I had done wrong. And it's not that I didn't do anything wrong. Look, I had all sorts of sin, but it was mostly the sin of living in constant fear of a man instead of God.
Absolutely.
But that wasn't the one that was pointed out. It was always, whatever. I can't remember. It was just like, I got frustrated, or,
yep.
Listen, it's not like I was running around the house. I was always walking on eggshells.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, anyway, I think that, like you, I would take way more than my fair share of the blame. And then in the end, the whole counseling session would end up focused on me. And a lot of times I'm sure
yes.
I recognize that. And so
absolutely.
To see what the myth is that this is a marital problem. And so, churches absolutely. And counselors try to do marital counseling, which does not work in these situations.
No.
But it's really sad to me that your church elevated your marriage over your life.
It absolutely did.
We see that all the time at Call to Peace, and it just breaks my heart, Yes,
and I do too. And it's heartbreaking. And that's what the message I was hearing is your marriage is more important than your life. And I actually had internalized that to the point of believing that if I died inside of my marriage, that would honor God. And so I just had no concept of what it would mean to take care of myself. I did not believe it was biblical for me to even protect myself. And so that's how I ended up being in this marriage for 20 years, is because I just kept following what the pastors and would say and the way they would twist scripture. And yeah. And so,
saying, I want to back up to the biblical part too. If, look at David running from Saul, who had authority for him, who was his father-in-law and the king of the land, and he fled for his life. Or
yes.
Paul, the many times that he had to escape, or even Jesus, before it was time, he eluded their grasp. And when he died, it was his choice to lay down his life for us, but it was not like he was just letting people beat him up. So to me, I don't understand where they're saying that it's not biblical to get yourself safe. It makes no sense to me.
Right. It doesn't. And really, as I've come to understand it, it's a lot about who they believe, right? Because they don't believe the victim. They believe the man. He tends to be more logical. You're talking to men, and so they tend to believe the man. I've actually had pastors a friend who was a pastor come to me and apologize because I had shared some of my struggles with him. And he said, Brooke, I would talk to him. He seemed logical, and you were crying and emotional. And so it's easier for me to identify with him.
Yes.
And I was wrong, and I'm sorry. And that's kind of what I think I've experienced in my story.
And that's one of the things we do at Called to Pieces when we're working with those who are being victimized. We teach them not to be so emotional, because that is part of the reason that they're often not believed. And I see it now. I remember my pastor, and I was in more of a mainline church because I lived in a small town, and that was what was on every corner. So thankfully, he wasn't telling me I needed to stay and put up with the abuse, but he seemed to turn on me. And I thought, why would he turn on me? I'm the one that's been serving, and I'm the one that's done, why in the world? And I realized, looking back on my story, I just lost it one day in his office when he tried to bring us in for marital counseling. And my ex said, he said, you don't care about me. You just want to look good in front of him. So I thought, well, I'll just prove that I'm not trying to look good in front of the pastor.
Yeah.
By just losing it right now and cursing. And so I'm sure that made the pastor believe that this is something that she's been provoking, that it's a two-way street. And so we can sometimes hurt ourselves as victims of abuse because we are so emotional and we don't know how to present ourselves. We don't know that, but I mean, because I was just at that point desperate to save my marriage.
Yeah, me too.
So go ahead. I'm sorry. But I thought, you bring out these good points while we're getting there, and then we'll have to.
No, they're important. They're important. Yeah. So he did move to an apartment, and he lived there for about 4 months. We had an agreement with our church, which Joy and I can tell you is not a good plan. But we had written a written agreement with my church saying that he couldn't move back unless we both agreed. And it was as good as the paper was written on. And so at the end of 4 months, he decided he was moving home. And he had given no indication up to that point. And we had gotten to the point, our marriage was so bad, I was only texting him, because if I spoke to him, it was so abusive, the things he would say, the manipulations. He just, everything I said, he would twist, and then he would take it back to the pastors and say, see, she said this. And so I got to the point where I would only text him because that way I had proof of what I'd said. And he tried to move back into the home. And at that point, my church had completely almost removed their help from me. They had said I could only speak to them through email, and I could only speak to them face to face if I already had an appointment. And so I was on my own. I still had these counselors, and after he moved in, we left because I really did believe my safety and my kids' safety primarily was at issue. And through a weekend of reading Leslie Vernick's book, The Emotionally Destructive Marriage, and so reading her stuff all weekend long, I come to the end of the weekend and realize my marriage is not savable. Not that I don't want my husband to repent, but I can't be part of that process because it's just not going to work. And so I file a protection order. Good. And at that point, my church tells me I probably want to worship somewhere else. And so I'm at the worst.
You lose your marriage and you lose your church all in one fell swoop. And you are not the only one that we've heard that story from.
Yeah. It's such a typical story. Yeah. And so then I was completely alone. I had these counselors, and that was it. and they were they're counselors, so they cost money. And that's something obviously I did not have anymore. And so I had nothing, and I had to walk this process I probably walked for through Leslie Vernick, I started really exploring like what's out there, where are Christians that have gone through this. And through that process, I found Joy and Called to Peace, and her book, which I read in a day, because, oh my gosh, there's another Christian woman who loves Jesus, her first and foremost love is Jesus. She loves the Word of God. It's the most important thing to her. And she's walked this road before me. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, I can listen to her. And so I read her book, and then I reached out like, Joy, can you help me? Like, what am I doing here? And so I got to join some support groups that she has in
online.
Online groups. And because I'm out here on the West Coast and she's on the East Coast, so we can't connect any other way, but I'm part of an online group. And then eventually she started some online training, and I joined that because I don't ever I want to be able to impact and help other women not go through what I went through and lose their church and lose all of their support. I homeschool, and so that was the one thing I still had, is I had my my co-op community, and they really helped walk me through as best they could, but they'd never seen abuse before. They had no idea how to help me. And so I really walked the whole road by myself, and had to read lots of books and reach out to the online community. And really that's where I found so much hope and so much help and so much encouragement that I'm not alone, that I'm going to make it. God is going to provide. Because honestly, from my perspective, I'm here and I've gotten through a year of, it's been 2 years now that I've been out, and I can see that far, but I can't see what's going to happen in 5 years. And so it's just really amazing to have this group of people who love Jesus more than they love anything else, who love his word, and who are encouraging me on towards truth. And then another piece where I'm being educated on how to help other women who've gone through what I've gone through, and hopefully that they don't have to go through it themselves, that I or someone else can walk that road with them, something I didn't have. So.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I wrote the book. It's the book that I wanted. I'm like, I found some books on abuse, but I mean, I got out in the 90s. There were no online support groups or anything, no presence online that would be able to help me. So, but everything that I was reading was angry, and there might have, most of them were secular resources. I couldn't find any Christian resources back then, but I'm like, I just want to know somebody who's walked through this and didn't come out so angry. I mean, I read one that was a Christian book that said you don't need to forgive. And I'm thinking, that's not biblical. What I needed to do was sort through and understand what forgiveness meant, that it didn't mean that I had to trust, and it didn't mean that I had to reconcile, but that's what kept, getting me caught up every single time I would forgive. And I thought that meant I had to reconcile.
Right.
So
that was huge for me in your book, just this idea that I can forgive him, but I don't ever have to take him back in my home.
Forgiveness does not equal trust, and even for those, I mean, for me, I was not willing to give up my marriage. I stayed just separated and did not file for divorce because that was just my biblical conviction.
So I think it's just been Called to Peace is just really helpful. And I hope that what we can do is I can be a Called to Peace person out here. And when people need help out I'm in Washington State, so out here in Washington, and that there be somebody to contact and help. And I'm in conversation. I wouldn't say that everything is amazing. I'm in conversation with my church that I'm currently attending, trying to help them see what's true. Since I've been through it, and I'm not young anymore, I'm not 26. And I often remind them that if I was 26 and they talked to me this way, I'd leave and not come back. But I have the strength the Lord has given me to be able to say, hey, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's helpful. I don't need them to accept divorce as the only option. And I didn't divorce my husband. He did divorce me. But I do want to create places for women to come who are not going to be judged, and so that they can have freedom to make the decision they need to make to get safe and to financially protect themselves and to protect themselves physically for both their children and themselves, And that requires churches that are willing to say, we will take you. We maybe don't understand where you're coming from. We maybe don't agree biblically that it's okay for you to do whatever, but let's agree to at least disagree. And we can support you, because protecting women and children is definitely on God's mission. And that's my great hope. And so hopefully, by God's grace, that'll be the thing I get to do for the rest of my life, is just work in this work and work with Joy, because I just love her vision. And I love, like she said before, just about people, the books out there are not hopeful. They don't talk about, did forgiveness, not for the sake of your abuser, but for your own sake, for your relationship with Christ. What does it look like to heal biblically? I mean, Joy's workbook is incredible. You'll cry a ton, but it's so helpful to work through, because you're writing out all of the things, that what happened to you, and then letting the Lord speak into each of those moments so that you can have healing, because you don't need to carry those around with you anymore. And as I've gotten out and I've gotten some healing, I don't get migraines anymore. I get them very, very rarely. My thyroid started working again, and I don't take thyroid medication anymore. Kidney failure is a permanent situation for me, but I'm not affected daily by it. And so for all intents and purposes, I went from a person who could not run, I could not live, because I was so sick all the time. I made no plans. I was tied to my bed. I took all kinds of medication every single day. And now I have 2 part-time jobs. I homeschool my kids full-time. I'm a single mom. I couldn't do any of that if I was as sick as when I was married to my ex-husband. And now the Lord has just done miracles and continues to do them as he continues to heal me through so much of what I've walked through in Joy's book and now the workbook. Just amazing, really.
That's awesome. Thanks, Brooke. Well, the thing is too, it's like you say, there are so many books and things out there now, and I'm not doing this to promote my book. I really am not, but these are the things that God led me through. Yes. But what I see when I read so many of the books is that so many people are still so angry.
Yeah.
And you could be angry. I mean, you could be angry at your church. So what my friend Chris Moles calls, he says, what did he call them? Instead of activists, they're attacktivists.
Yeah.
We don't need to do that. We want to try to work within the body of Christ, and we don't.
Yep.
Not all churches miss it. So my first interview was actually with a woman whose church got it right.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it is beautiful. And so, as long as the churches are willing to learn, we're willing to work with them and come alongside. Yep. We're not going to attack them, because we understand that it's just a very confusing topic to deal with.
Exactly. Exactly.
The pastor said he had to come back and apologize, but the reason was just the way it presents is extremely confusing. So that's part of our mission at Call to Peace, is to help educate churches. The other part is to help educate future advocates, because it's just getting like the floodgates have opened and we cannot handle it. And so we have a very, it's a meaty 1-year advocacy training in it.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Well, actually, there were college courses that Dr. Deborah Wingfield of House of Peace developed and taught at Colorado State University. I hope I got that right. Pueblo. I know she was in Pueblo, but she's got 20 courses that she wrote, and we're doing about 10 of them, and then we created a couple of new ones, but she's allowing me to put the biblical perspective on that, which is amazing. I mean, this is very meaty, and hers is based on research and
yes.
Basically what does the research say? Because there's a lot of faulty research out there even.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciated that, what she brings to the table. I've got a background not only as a biblical counselor, but also as but I've been a certified advocate, and I've worked with the domestic violence shelters only because, when I got out 23 years ago, there were no Christian resources at all. I'm so thrilled to see them popping up, but I'm also concerned about what's popping up. We have, I'm really grateful that, the Southern Baptist Convention has that church that cares well.
Yes. Yeah.
But my fear is that, people will watch that and say, oh, now we're prepared and we are equipped to handle domestic abuse. No, you still need to reach out to people who have expertise in this area, because it is one of the most difficult things you'll ever deal with. And without somebody, you have to have a team approach. So we're actually our next conference will be April 2020. We're going to be having Chris Moles come back, and he's going to be talking about how it requires a team approach. And, church is really, unless it's a very, very mild case and there's something very unusual about it, it's almost impossible to deal with it all in-house.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, anyway, Brooke, I really appreciate everything you've said. I had, I think you actually have answered all my questions. So you did it in the telling of the story. So I do appreciate it. I'm really excited about what God's done in your life. That's so exciting. Same thing happened with me. I had terrible migraines. And then when I got out, they cleared up as I healed. And I see that with so many of the women we work with, a lot of the physical symptoms. So, if a church is telling someone to stay in a situation that is slowly killing them just by stress can kill you. And it's like living with a terrorist. I mean,
it is.
You're not allowed to come out of your room. That is not what God intended for marriage. I can tell you that. And so I really do appreciate you taking the time to tell us your story. And any last words, any encouragement?
I just want to say God is big enough for any story. And he has a story. He's the changer of stories, right? He took Rahab, who was a prostitute, and he made her into the line of Christ. And any woman who is experiencing domestic violence feels like she is on the outside of the camp, but that is not where you are in God's eyes. And just reach out for help, called to peace, or to someone who loves Jesus and is willing to walk with you, because God is enough and he will take care of you. It's such an amazing thing to see.
Amen. And I think you have to just learn to elevate God above the problems. But no, that's a wonderful way to end. Thank you so much, Brooke. And
you're welcome.
I'll be talking to you later, and I'm looking forward to seeing this online.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Troy.